I never thought a single dinner could change my perspective so drastically. But that night, everything shifted. My family always had a way of making me feel like an outsider, like a bit player in a drama starring my younger brother Leo. He was the golden child, tech prodigy, startup genius, and my parents' unspoken favorite. Meanwhile, I was the handyman, the guy with grease under his nails, the one who fixed things but never quite fixed himself in their eyes. I'm Sam, 28, and I've been working as an HVAC technician for almost a decade now. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. I've got a modest one-bedroom apartment, a decent truck, and a loyal dog named Rusty. I may not have Leo's downtown loft or his endless list of achievements, but I've got my peace. At least I did until that night. It was a Friday, and I'd just finished a grueling shift wrestling a faulty compressor out of a cramped basement. My clothes were damp with sweat, and my arms ached from maneuvering heavy tools. I was looking forward to a cold beer and some time with Rusty when my phone buzzed. It was Mom again. "Sam, you have to come to dinner tonight," she said, her tone more demand than invitation. "Your brother has big news, and it's important we all support each other as a family." I sighed, already picturing the smug grin on Leo's face, the way he'd dominate the conversation while my parents hung on his every word. But part of me still hoped after all these years that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as more than just the backup kid, the one who never quite measured up. When I walked into their house, Leo was already there, lounging on the leather couch like a king holding court. He wore a crisp button-down, his hair perfectly styled, his expensive watch catching the light as he lazily scrolled through his phone. Mom was in the kitchen fussing over a roast while Dad flipped channels on the TV, a beer in hand, barely acknowledging me when I stepped inside. "Hey, Sam," Leo said without looking up, his tone dripping with that old familiar condescension. "Still turning wrenches for a living." I forced a smile, shrugging off my jacket. "Still coding your way to the top. You know it," he said, finally meeting my eyes with that infuriating, confident smirk. "Just closed a major funding round. CEO says I'm up for a corner office soon." "That's great," I replied, though it felt like I was swallowing glass. I'd spent my day crawling through a dusty attic, fixing a unit that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Leo, meanwhile, had likely spent his in a climate-controlled office, ordering overpriced coffee and talking in buzzwords. We sat down for dinner, the table set with Mom's best china, the good silverware gleaming under the overhead light. She poured us all a glass of wine, pausing to pat Leo's shoulder, pride radiating from her like heat from a furnace. "Sam, honey, I hope work's been steady," she said as she passed the bread. I could hear the polite concern in her voice, the kind you use for strangers or distant relatives. "We worry about you. You know, it's a tough job." I nodded, tearing off a piece of bread, feeling the old familiar sting. They never asked Leo if his job was tough. They never worried about his career, only celebrated it. "It's steady," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Pays the bills." "That's good," Dad chimed in, his eyes still on the TV. "But maybe you should think about something with a bit more upward mobility." "You're smart, Sam. You could do more." I forced a chuckle. "Upward mobility, huh? Like coding?" Leo smirked, tapping the edge of his wine glass. "Hey, if you ever want to learn, I can send you some resources. Might help you step up from changing filters." I bit back a sharp reply, reminding myself that these dinners always played out the same. Leo was the rising star. The prodigy, I was the steady, unremarkable older brother. Reliable, but unimpressive. Then came the announcement. Leo leaned back in his chair, flashing that movie star smile. "So I have some exciting news," he began, holding everyone's attention like a seasoned performer. "We just finalized our Series C funding. My shares alone are worth 7 figures now." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. Dad set his beer down, his eyes finally off the TV. They beamed at him, their pride practically glowing. "That's amazing, son," Dad said, his voice thick with admiration. "We always knew you'd do something incredible." I felt a pang in my chest, the sharp, familiar twist of being overlooked. I'd just gotten promoted to lead technician at my company, a role I'd worked hard for, but I knew better than to bring it up now. It would only sound petty against Leo's multi-million-dollar milestone. "Sam," Mom said, her eyes still wet with joy. Isn't this incredible? Aren't you proud of your brother? I met Leo's gaze, saw the flicker of smug satisfaction in his eyes, the quiet, unspoken victory. He'd done it again, claimed the spotlight, left me in the shadows. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile as I raised my glass. Proud of you, Leo. But in that moment, as I clinked my glass against his, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just the overlooked older brother I was, something else, something that felt a lot like free. The days that followed that dinner felt different. Like a fog had lifted and I could finally see my family for who they really were. It was as if I had been waiting my whole life for their approval, hoping that one day they'd see me as something more than just the guy who fixed things. But that night I realized they never would. They were too invested in their version of reality. One where Leo was the prodigy and I was the backup plan. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts and tackling the toughest jobs. There was something therapeutic about the physical labor, the way a stubborn wrench or a rusted bolt demanded my full attention. It kept my mind from wandering back to that dinner, from replaying Leo's smug grin and my parents' tearful pride. A week later, I found myself wedged between two ancient boilers in a stuffy basement, the air thick with the metallic scent of rust and mildew. My shirt clung to my back, and my arms ached from wrestling loose a corroded pipe. As I twisted the final fitting into place, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but something made me reach for it, smearing grease across the screen as I swiped to unlock. It was a message from Leo. I frowned, wiping my hands on my overalls before opening it. Leo. Hey, big bro. Just wanted to say thanks for being supportive at dinner. I know our lives are different, but I appreciate you being there. Hope things are good on your end. Let me know if you ever want to grab a beer, my treat. I stared at the message for a long moment, my mind wrestling with the mixed emotions it stirred. Was this his attempt at a peace offering? Or just another way of reminding me of the gap between us? I could almost picture him, feet up in his glass-walled office, typing the message between investor calls. His life a blur of sleek power suits and high-stakes meetings. I thought about responding, maybe even taking him up on the offer, but something in me resisted. I didn't want a pity beer, a chance for him to play the humble tech genius while I recounted stories about faulty thermostats and clogged ducts. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and tightened the last fitting, letting the clang of metal drown out the faint buzz of a second incoming message. After my shift, I stopped by my local dive bar for a cold beer and a bit of solitude. The place was half empty, the kind of spot where the jukebox still played classic rock and the bartender knew your usual without asking. I slid onto a stool, feeling the tension in my shoulders slowly ease as I took a long pull from my glass. Rough day, the bartender, Lisa, asked as she wiped down the counter. Something like that, I muttered, running a hand through my sweaty hair. Family stuff, she chuckled, tossing the towel over her shoulder. Aren't they always a pain in the ass? I laughed, the sound rough in my throat. Yeah, you could say that. Before I could sink too deep into my own thoughts, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated, then pulled it out, half expecting another message from Leo. Instead, it was a notification from my mom. Mom, Leo just told us you didn't respond to his message. Don't be petty, Sam. He's trying to reach out. I set the phone down on the bar with a bit more force than I'd intended, the glass next to it rattling slightly. The bartender glanced over, but I waved her off, forcing a tight smile. Petty. That word echoed in my head as I drained my beer. I wasn't being petty. I was tired. Tired of the double standards, the unspoken rules that always seemed to favor my brother. I thought about the countless times I'd shown up for family dinners, smiled through their backhanded compliments, and played the part of the steady, unremarkable son. Was it really petty to finally draw a line to demand a bit of respect? I flagged Lisa for another beer, my mind spinning. Maybe it was time I started focusing on myself, on building a life that didn't revolve around their expectations. I had a solid job, a few good friends, and a dog that loved me unconditionally. Maybe that was enough. As I nursed my second beer, I started drafting a mental list of the things I wanted for myself. A better apartment, maybe a house one day. More time for hobbies. A chance to reconnect with old friends. I even considered taking a few business courses, maybe looking into what it would take to start my own HVAC company. By the time I left the bar, the air outside had cooled and the stars were just starting to peek through the smoggy city sky. I walked back to my truck, the engine rumbling to life as I pulled onto the main road, my thoughts clearer than they had been in weeks. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Hope. The weeks after that dinner felt strangely lighter. I hadn't realized how much of my mental space had been tied up in my family's expectations until I started letting go. My phone still buzzed with the occasional group chat update or family photo sent by my mom, but I found myself glancing at the notifications and swiping them away without a second thought. Work kept me grounded. There was a steady rhythm to it, a kind of brutal honesty in fixing things that I'd come to appreciate. A broken compressor didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It either worked or it didn't. There was a comfort in that kind of clarity. One scorching Thursday, I found myself up on the roof of a strip mall cursing the mid-July sun as I adjusted the refrigerant levels on a rusted old unit that had clearly been neglected for years. The metal burned through my gloves as I tightened a valve, and sweat trickled down my back, soaking into my shirt. I straightened up, stretching my aching shoulders when my phone buzzed again. I pulled it from my pocket, squinting at the screen through the glare. It was a message from a buddy of mine, Jake, who worked in finance. "Jake, dude, you seen this Leo's company just got hit with a class action lawsuit. Investors are flipping out." I felt a cold knot form in my gut as I quickly thumbed through the news app. There it was, splashed across the business section. Something about fraudulent earnings reports, inflated user metrics, and a CEO stepping down amid swirling accusations. My heart thudded heavily as I scrolled through the article, piecing together the messy unraveling of my brother's supposedly bulletproof startup words, like misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, and potential criminal charges, jumped out at me, the harsh black text searing itself into my mind. I leaned back against the metal casing of the AC unit, feeling the heat seep through my shirt, but my mind was miles away back at that dinner table where Leo had practically glowed as he boasted about his 7-figure shares. Had he known even then that it was all a house of cards? Had he looked me in the eyes, smug and untouchable, fully aware that his empire was already crumbling? A bitter chuckle escaped my throat, lost in the roar of the rooftop fans. I should have felt some kind of satisfaction, maybe even a twisted sense of justice, but all I felt was a deep, aching disappointment. Not just in Leo, but in my parents, who had invested so much of themselves in a son who had clearly been living a lie. The next few days were a blur. More news articles surfaced, each more damning than the last. The SEC was launching an investigation. Former employees were coming forward with stories of toxic management and shady accounting practices, and investors were lining up for their pound of flesh. My parents' texts became more frantic, shifting from casual family updates to thinly veiled pleas for reassurance. "Mom, Leo's been so stressed. He says it's just a misunderstanding. Can you reach out to him? He could use your support. Dad family sticks together. Sam? Don't believe everything you read. Your brother needs us right now." I couldn't help but shake my head at their willful blindness. Even now, with the writing clearly on the wall, they clung to the illusion of their perfect son, the golden child who could do no wrong. It was as if they had tied their entire sense of self-worth to his success, unable to accept the possibility that their star might actually be a black hole slowly collapsing in on itself. One evening, after a particularly rough day of work, I found myself back at the same dive bar nursing a beer and trying to drown out the incessant buzzing of my phone. Jake slid onto the stool next to me, tossing his phone onto the bar with a wry grin. "Man, your brother's company is making headlines for all the wrong reasons," he said, signaling Lisa for a drink. "You seen the latest? They're talking about possible jail time for some of the execs." I took a long pull from my glass, feeling the cold liquid cut through the haze of sweat and exhaustion. Yeah, I saw. Not exactly surprising. Jake shook his head, his expression a mix of sympathy and morbid curiosity. Must be weird, right? Watching him go down like this. I thought about that for a moment, swirling the last of my beer in the glass. Honestly, it just feels inevitable, like this was always going to happen. Jake let out a low whistle. Brutal man. But I get it. Some people just can't help but fly too close to the sun. I tipped my glass to him in silent agreement, draining the last of my beer as Jake moved to start another round. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the worn wood of the bar top. I glanced at the screen, expecting another guilt-tripping message from my mom, but froze when I saw the caller ID. It was Leo. I let it ring, the low hum of the phone blending with the clinking of glasses and the muffled drone of the jukebox. When it finally stopped, I set my glass down and stared at the reflection of the bar lights in the polished counter. My mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. For a moment, I considered calling him back, maybe even trying to offer some kind of brotherly support. But then I remembered the smug grin, the dismissive chuckles, the countless dinners where I'd been the punchline to his success story. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the bar, and walked out into the humid night, my phone still buzzing with Leo's second then third missed call. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the familiar tug of obligation. I just felt free. A few days later, I came home to find my phone blinking with a series of missed calls and increasingly frantic voicemails. The messages were a tangled mess of emotions, my parents' voices weaving together into a chaotic tapestry of panic and desperation. Mom, Sam, please call us back. Your brother's going through a tough time. We need to talk. Dad, son, you can't just ignore your family. This is serious. Mom, Leo is devastated. He's saying things I'm scared, Sam. Please just call me. I sank onto my couch, Rusty hopping up beside me, his warm weight a comforting contrast to the chill settling into my chest. I scratched his ears absent-mindedly as I replayed the voicemails, each one painting a clearer picture of the unfolding disaster. Finally, I hit the button to call my parents back, my thumb hovering over the screen for a moment before I forced myself to press it. The phone rang twice before my mom picked up, her voice raw and trembling. "Oh, Sam, thank God," she gasped. "I didn't think you'd call back." "Mom," I said, struggling to keep my tone even. "What's going on?" There was a shaky inhale on the other end of the line. "It's Leo. He's a mess." Ever since this news broke, he's barely eating, barely sleeping. He says everyone's turned on him, that no one believes him anymore. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the couch, as Rusty shifted beside me, sensing my tension. "Mom, you know what's going on, right? His company's under investigation. This isn't just a bad quarter or a rough patch. He might actually be in serious legal trouble." There was a long silence, the kind that stretches thin and tight, threatening to snap. We don't believe it, Sam," she whispered finally. "We raised him better than this. He wouldn't do something like that." I bit back a bitter laugh. Memories of Leo's casual manipulations flashing through my mind, the way he'd played my parents against each other to get what he wanted. The constant half-truths, the carefully curated image he projected. "Mom," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "I know you want to believe the best about him, but maybe it's time to face the possibility that Leo isn't the person you've always thought he was." She choked out a soft sob, the sound twisting something deep in my chest. Despite everything, despite years of being the second choice, the afterthought, it still hurt to hear my mother in pain. "Just, can you talk to him?" she pleaded. "He listens to you, Sam. Maybe you can get through to him." I hesitated, my thumb tracing the worn edge of the couch cushion. I could feel the weight of her expectation pressing down on me, the unspoken demand that I once again step into the role of the steady, reliable son, the one who cleaned up the messes and bridged the gaps. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice tight. "But Mom, you need to prepare yourself. This might not end the way you want it to." She sniffed the sound, muffled like she'd pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from breaking down completely. "Just think about it, Sam, please." I hung up without saying goodbye, the guilt already creeping in like a slow, relentless tide. I dropped my phone onto the coffee table and leaned back, rubbing my hands over my face as Rusty nosed my side. His warm breath a gentle reminder that at least one being in my life loved me unconditionally. The next day, I dragged myself through work. My mind still tangled in the phone call with my mother. I found myself making small mistakes, my focus slipping as I replayed her trembling voice in my head. By the time my shift ended, I felt more wrung out than I had in years, the emotional weight pressing down on me like a wet blanket. When I got home, there was a package waiting on my doorstep, a small, neatly wrapped box with a card taped to the top. I frowned, bending down to scoop it up as Rusty barked excitedly from the other side of the door. I kicked off my boots and stepped inside, letting the cool air of my apartment wash over me as I dropped the package onto the kitchen counter. Rusty danced around my feet, his tail thumping against the cabinet doors as I tore open the envelope. The card inside was simple, just a few lines of neat, familiar handwriting. "Sam, thanks for being there. I know I haven't always said it, but I appreciate you. Leo." I frowned, flipping the card over as if expecting more, but that was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the chaos he'd unleashed, just a vague, half-hearted expression of gratitude. I tossed the card aside and turned my attention to the box itself, carefully peeling back the paper to reveal a sleek black water bottle with Leo's company logo emblazoned across the side. I snorted, turning the bottle over in my hands, the weight of the metal cool against my palm. So, this was it. This was his version of an olive branch, a cheap promotional gift from a company on the brink of collapse. I set the bottle down beside the sink, the metal clanging against the countertop as I shook my head in disbelief. It was almost funny in a dark, twisted way. Even now, with his empire crumbling around him, Leo couldn't help but see the world through the lens of his own self-importance. Rusty whined at my feet, nudging my leg with his nose, and I bent down to scratch behind his ears, letting his warm, steady presence ground me. "Come on, boy," I muttered, straightening up and grabbing his leash. "Let's get out of here for a while." As we stepped out into the cool evening air, the sun dipping below the skyline in a blaze of red and gold, I felt a strange, simmering resolve settle into my bones. Maybe it was time I started living for myself, not for my family's broken expectations or my brother's misplaced pride. Maybe it was time to finally let go. A few weeks passed, and I managed to carve out a sense of normalcy again. I threw myself into work, tackling every challenging job that came my way, pouring my frustration into rusted bolts and leaking compressors. It was the kind of honest physical labor that left my muscles aching and my mind blissfully numb by the time I crashed into bed each night. But my family's unraveling was never far from my thoughts, a constant low-level hum at the back of my mind. I'd stopped checking the business news after a while, the steady drip of bad press around Leo's company becoming too much to stomach. But the calls from my parents hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd become more frequent. Their messages tinged with a growing desperation that I tried my best to ignore. One evening, just as I was wrapping up a particularly grueling shift at a downtown office building, my phone buzzed again. I leaned back against my truck, my shirt clinging to my sweat-soaked back, and glanced at the screen. It was my dad. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen before finally swiping to answer. "Hey, Dad." "Sam." His voice was rough, strained, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm glad you picked up. Your mother's been worried sick." I bit back the sarcastic reply that rose to my lips, leaning my head back against the sun-warmed metal of the truck's door. "What's going on?" There was a long, uncomfortable silence, the kind that usually signaled a conversation I'd rather avoid. "It's your brother," he said finally, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "He's in real trouble, Sam." "Worse than we thought." I closed my eyes. The image of Leo's smug, self-assured grin flashing through my mind, followed by the ghost of my mother's trembling voice from our last call. What kind of trouble? I asked, my jaw tightening as I prepared myself for the worst. Dad exhaled, the sound crackling over the line like a blown-out speaker. "They've frozen his assets. Everything. The house, his cars, his accounts. He's been locked out of his own company, and the SEC is coming down hard." There's talk of prison time. I felt my stomach drop, a cold, heavy weight settling in my gut as the full scope of Leo's downfall came into focus. For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, a dark, twisted sense of justice at the thought of my golden boy brother finally facing real consequences. But it was quickly swallowed by a deeper, more complicated ache, the kind that came from realizing just how far your family had fallen. "What do you need from me, Dad?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I'd intended. There was another long pause, the kind that stretched like a taut wire vibrating with unspoken tension. We need help, Sam," he said finally, his voice breaking on the last word. "The bank's coming after us. We co-signed on a lot of Leo's loans, and now they're calling them in. We could lose the house." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose as the weight of his words crashed over me. Of course they had co-signed. Of course they had bet everything on Leo's success, blind to the warning signs that had been there all along. "I can't just bail you out, Dad," I said, my voice hardening as I pushed myself off the truck, pacing the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. "I've got my own bills to pay, my own life to worry about." "Please, Sam," he whispered, his voice cracking. Just think about it. We don't have anyone else to turn to." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking as I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and slammed the door shut, the echo ringing out in the humid evening air. I drove home in silence, my mind racing as I replayed the conversation over and over, each word chipping away at the thin shell of detachment I'd tried so hard to build. When I finally stumbled through my front door, Rusty bounded up to greet me, his tail thumping against my legs as he whined for attention. I dropped to my knees, burying my face in his fur, letting his warm, steady presence ground me as my mind spiraled. They were really going to lose everything. My parents, the people who had spent decades pouring all their hopes and dreams into Leo, were about to lose their home, their savings, everything they had worked for. All because they had bet it all on a son who had turned out to be a fraud. I pushed myself to my feet, stumbling into the kitchen to grab a beer from the fridge. My mind still spinning, I cracked the can open and took a long, bitter swig, letting the cold, sharp bite of the alcohol cut through the fog of my thoughts. As I leaned against the counter, the cool metal pressing into my back, I thought about all the times my parents had brushed me aside in favor of my brother. The missed birthdays, the forgotten milestones, the countless family dinners where my accomplishments had been reduced to punchlines and polite smiles. I thought about the water bottle Leo had sent me still sitting beside the sink, its sleek black surface a mocking reminder of his crumbling empire. I took another long drink, my mind churning with conflicting emotions as Rusty whined at my feet, his eyes wide and worried. Maybe it was time I made a choice. Maybe it was time to stop letting my family's mistakes define me, to finally cut the cord and live my own life free from the shadow of my brother's failures. I took one last swig from the can, crushing the empty metal in my fist before tossing it into the sink with a satisfying clatter. Maybe it was time to finally put myself first. A few days after my dad's desperate call, I found myself standing in front of my apartment window, staring out at the gray, rain-soaked street below. Rusty whined softly at my side, his head resting on my thigh as if sensing the storm brewing in my mind. I hadn't called my parents back. I hadn't even responded to the flood of messages from my mom, each one more frantic than the last. They had bet everything on Leo, tied their financial futures to his shaky empire, and now they were drowning in the fallout. For years, I'd watched from the sidelines the forgotten son, the steady but unremarkable backup to my brother's blinding spotlight. But now that the lights had gone out, they were looking to me to pick up the pieces to save them from the mess they had helped create. Part of me wanted to do it, to step in and pull them back from the brink, to prove to them once and for all that I was more than just a handyman, that I was capable of being the son they had always wanted. But another deeper part of me, the part that had been quietly simmering for years, building pressure with each slight and dismissal, was screaming at me to finally let go. The next morning, I threw myself into work with a kind of grim determination, taking on every tough job my boss tossed my way. The physical strain, a welcome distraction from the emotional chaos churning in my head. I found myself on a rooftop that afternoon, the sun baking the tar paper beneath my boots as I tightened the last bolts on a massive industrial unit. I straightened up, wiping the sweat from my brow as I gazed out over the city skyline, the distant hum of traffic blending with the whir of the newly repaired compressor. I pulled out my phone, hesitating for a long moment before dialing my parents' number. It rang twice before my mom picked up her voice, breathless and strained. "Sam." Oh, thank God we were so worried. I leaned against the warm metal casing of the unit, my jaw tightening as I forced myself to speak. "Mom, I've thought about it," I said, my voice coming out rough and unsteady, "about helping you and Dad." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, the sound crackling over the connection. "Oh, Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I knew you'd come through for us. I knew you'd do the right thing." I closed my eyes, the hot wind whipping at my face as I gathered my thoughts, trying to keep my voice steady. "But here's the thing. Mom," I continued, my fingers gripping the edge of the metal housing so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I can't do it. I can't save you from this." There was a stunned silence, the line crackling with the faint sounds of the TV in the background, my dad's muffled voice barking at some news anchor. What do you mean?" she stammered, the shock and disbelief clear in her tone. "I mean, I can't be your safety net this time," I said, my voice growing stronger as the words poured out. "I've spent my whole life being the reliable one, the steady one, the one who never asked for anything in return. But I'm done. I'm done cleaning up your messes and pretending like my needs don't matter." "Sam," she choked, her voice cracking with barely contained panic. "Please, you don't understand. We could lose everything. We could end up on the street." "I know," I said, my heart pounding as the full weight of my decision crashed over me. "But you made this bed. Mom, you chose to put all your faith in Leo, to bet everything on his dreams while ignoring mine. You chose to see him as the golden child and me as the backup plan. The afterthought." There was a strangled sob on the other end of the line, the sound twisting my gut even as I forced myself to stand firm to hold the line I had drawn. "I'm not doing it anymore," I said, my voice dropping to a rough final whisper. "I'm not sacrificing my future to bail you out of your bad decisions. You're on your own." I hung up before she could respond, my chest heaving as I dropped my phone back into my pocket and stared out over the shimmering heat haze rising from the rooftops below. For the first time in years, I felt a strange, hollow sense of freedom, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally slipped from my shoulders. I finished the job in silence, my mind still reeling from the confrontation as I packed up my tools and climbed down the creaking metal ladder to the pavement below. When I got home that night, Rusty greeted me with his usual eager wiggle, his tail thumping against the doorframe as I dropped to my knees and buried my face in his fur, letting his steady, comforting warmth ground me as the chaos of the day slowly ebbed away. Over the next few weeks, I focused on myself, on building a life that didn't revolve around my family's expectations or my brother's shattered dreams. I poured my energy into my work, started taking business courses at night, and even looked into the cost of leasing a small workshop, the idea of starting my own HVAC company slowly taking root in my mind. My parents continued to call, their messages growing more frantic as the weeks dragged on, but I never picked up. I deleted their voicemails without listening, refusing to let their desperation drag me back into the chaos I had finally escaped. And then one evening, as I was locking up my truck after a long day of work, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, my heart lurching as I saw the familiar name, Leo. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen for a long, painful moment before finally swiping to answer. "Hey, Sam." His voice came through thin and ragged, stripped of all its usual bravado. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I leaned back against my truck, the cool metal pressing into my spine as I closed my eyes and let his words wash over me. "I know I messed up," he continued, his voice trembling. "I know I let everyone down, but I'm trying to make it right. I hope you can forgive me." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of resentment and anger slowly lift from my chest, the knots in my shoulders unwinding as I exhaled. I don't know if I can. Leo, I said, finally, my voice coming out rough and unsteady, but I'm willing to try. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faint, flickering warmth of hope, the promise of a new beginning just within reach. Storytime. 2. My son was left in the intensive care unit by himself. He will be all right. Mom explained that your brother's birthday occurs once a year. She pleaded with me for assistance after her heart failed 5 years later. Hi everyone, prior to the start of today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe. Since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity, it's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. The video subreddit will now begin. My son was taken to the intensive care unit 5 years ago. I let everything go. I couldn't miss one meeting, though. I thus asked my parents over the phone if they could spend a few hours sitting with him. Yes. They said my son was by himself when I returned. To celebrate my brother's birthday, they had departed. This is how it transpired. I am a 38-year-old man who has his own contracting business with a focus on commercial remodeling. I've been in company for 11 years, and getting here wasn't simple. My early years were essentially a master lesson in raising one child while obviously giving preference to another. It was my responsibility. The person who played varsity baseball earned straight A's and worked a part-time job since I was 15. Pete, my 33-year-old younger brother, received recognition for being able to put on his own shoes. I'm not being overly dramatic here. Dad was a good-paying electrical engineer, but he was the type of man who believed that expressing emotion was a sign of a non-man. Mom was an elementary school teacher and was always understanding of Pete's mistakes, but she was never understanding of mine. My mother questioned me what had happened to the B+ when I brought home a report card that included all A's and 1 B+ as a reward for trying. They would take Pete out for ice cream after he brought home C's and D's. After moving out at the age of 18, I worked as a construction worker while attending community college before transferring to Indiana University to get my business degree. I divided my time between classes at night and job sites during my 80-hour work weeks. I never requested money from my parents. I had saved up enough money by the age of 27 to launch my own contracting company. First little tasks like constructing decks, remodeling bathrooms, etc., has established a reputation for providing high-quality services at reasonable prices. Began receiving larger commercial contracts, retail spaces, restaurant build-outs, and office renovations. When I was hired to remodel the dental clinic where Lauren worked as a hygienist, I got to know her. She was intelligent, straightforward, and had a laugh that could light up a room. When I was 30, we were married. A year later, we had our son Lucas. It was a nice life. The company was expanding. We purchased a home in a respectable area with top-notch schools. Even though I was working hard, I was still able to get home for supper most nights. Then at age 34, everything fell apart, and Fool jumped a red light when Lauren was driving home from work doing 70 in a 35. On impact, she passed away. According to the police, she most likely had no idea what had hit her. In one moment, I'm a contented husband, parent, and entrepreneur. The next day, I'm organizing a funeral and attempting to explain to a bewildered 3-year-old why his mother isn't returning home. The initial weeks passed quickly. I recall sitting on Lucas's bed every night as he sobbed himself to sleep and inquired about his mother's return. I would keep my composure until he fell asleep, then walk downstairs and collapse. Naturally, my parents attended the funeral. Dad said she was a good woman while standing clumsily in his suit and giving me a single shoulder pat. Mom gave me a firm embrace and devoted the most of the ceremony to worrying over Pete, who required continual care since he was so distraught about the loss of his sister-in-law. After staying at our house for the reception, they said they had to go since Pete needed assistance moving into his new apartment. Pete's credit was destroyed by maxing out several credit cards, so my dad co-signed for that one. They didn't even give me a casserole. In the weeks that followed, neither Lucas nor I received a single call to see how we were doing. No offers to watch Lucas, so I could finish off my job, or I guess spend an hour quietly grieving my wife. The day following the tragedy, Lauren's mother Beth traveled in from Portland and remained for 3 months. Despite having arthritis that made every action agonizing, she woke up every morning with Lucas and prepared his food. She was 65 years old. After dropping him off at preschool, I came home and did some washing or prepared meals that might be saved for later use or cleaned. Late at night, when the stillness became too loud, she would sit with me. When she eventually had to return to Portland, she remained silent and simply existed. She was her sister's primary caregiver with Miss. She sobbed more intensely than I had witnessed since the burial. She returned every few months to spend time with Lucas, and she insisted that I phone her every day. I had to rebuild our lives piece by piece when Lauren passed away. Lucas was picked up from preschool by the part-time nanny I hired, and she stayed with him until I came home. I changed my work schedule so that I would be home by 6 o'clock. Most of the time, I gained knowledge about cooking more than simply spaghetti and burgers. We created new habits and discovered a new normal. I periodically contacted my parents, mostly to allow Lucas to maintain some sort of relationship with his grandparents. Perhaps they might see him once every few months. They are always on time, usually for an hour or two at a restaurant where they would speak about Pete's newest business concept or spend most of their time on their phones. That just required a small initial investment. In other words, they have always been narcissistic piece of art. However, I ended things permanently with them 5 years ago. It was an April morning. I recall this because I was preparing Lucas's breakfast and mentally practicing my presentation for a significant client meeting that afternoon. He was enamored with dinosaurs in space when he was 6 years old, and in the first grade, he was eating cereal at the counter and told me about a program we had seen the previous evening that had taught him that a T-Rex's enormous weight prevented it from running quickly. His spoon fell out of his grasp, clattering on the bowl as he abruptly stopped speaking. Before I could get to him, his eyes rolled back as I looked up from my coffee. He fell on the kitchen floor after sliding off the stool. After becoming stiff, his body began to violently convulse. I saw that he had bitten through his tongue as blood gushed from his nostrils. After Lauren passed away, I completed a first aid course. I did it as a way to feel less powerless in a world that had shown me how little control I truly have. After making sure he wasn't choking and turning him onto his side, I timed the seizure after it had gone on for 2 minutes without showing any signs of ending. This was awful. I knew. After picking him up, I snatched up my keys and hurried to the car. Still seizing, I placed him across the back seat and drove as if I were in a fast-paced pursuit. Blew through stop signs and red lights to make the 15-minute trip to the hospital in less than 7 minutes. I yelled for assistance as I drew up to the emergency door and took him inside. A doctor and a group of nurses hurried over in a trolley. His little body was still jerking blood and froth around his mouth as I placed him down. "He's been seizing for how long?" the physician inquired. I checked my watch and stated, "It's been about 9 minutes now." They hurried him back right away while yelling medical jargon that I couldn't comprehend. As they removed him, a nurse led me to registration. I stood there with his blood on my shirt, shakily filling out documents and answering questions mechanically. Before a doctor came out to speak with me, 4 hours had gone by. A lady in her mid-40s, Dr. Rivera, had a straightforward demeanor and weary eyes. "Your youngster has bacterial meningitis. Mr. Wilson, it's quite serious. The membranes around his brain and spinal cord are inflamed as a result of the bacterium. This irritation caused the seizure. Strong antibiotics have been started for him, but the next 48 hours are crucial." She clarified that he will be admitted to the intensive care unit. They were worried about swelling in his head and elevated intracranial pressure since the meningitis had advanced quickly. They may need to perform a procedure to relieve the pressure if the antibiotics were unable to reduce the swelling in a timely manner. They wheeled Lucas up to the intensive care unit and I followed. He was not conscious. connected to more machines than I could keep track of. He was breathing on a ventilator. Monitors beeped steadily as IVs were inserted into both arms, measuring every bodily function. In between conversations with nurses and doctors, I sat next to his bed and held his limp hand as I tried to comprehend how we had gone from dinosaur facts at breakfast to this nightmare in a matter of hours. I rescheduled everything on my calendar by making phone calls. My project manager took charge of the daily tasks. After I explained the situation, the clients were understanding, but I was unable to reschedule one meeting. We were on the verge of signing a $15 million contract to renovate a chain of upscale fitness facilities after 10 years of developing my business. Just for this one evening, the investors were flying in from Singapore to sign the documents and finalize the details. My presence starting at 6 p.m. was crucial to the entire transaction till 10 p.m. Carl, my business partner, was meeting with suppliers in Zurich that week. I was the only one who could sign off on the final terms. If I missed this meeting, there was a good chance the investors would walk. They had other contractors waiting in line. If we couldn't deliver, this contract would allow me to employ more workers, take on bigger projects, and most importantly, generate more financial stability for Lucas. After losing Lauren, making sure Lucas was cared for had become my primary concern. I contacted the chief nurse to ask about Lucas's situation. "He's stable for now," she replied. "The antibiotics are being provided and we're monitoring his intracranial pressure constantly. The neurologist will be making checks throughout the evening." Then I phoned my parents. They lived 15 minutes from the hospital in the same house I'd grown up in, Mom. "It's Dean," I said when she responded. "Lucas is in the ICU with bacterial meningitis. It's pretty serious. I need you and Dad to come sit with him for just 4 hours tonight while I finish this sale. It's critical." "Of course." "Dean," she responded without hesitation. "We'll be there. Do not be concerned about Lucas. Pay attention to your meeting." I felt a sense of comfort as I heard her acquiesce so easily. They were Lucas's grandparents despite our tense connection. In an emergency, they would undoubtedly step up. They arrived at the hospital around 5 p.m. Dad greeted me with his usual stony nod. Mom pushed Lucas's hair back from his forehead and gave him a pat on the hand. "This is ours," she said. "Go take care of your business." I go over everything that the physicians were seeing with them. When medications were due, the nurses advised keeping an eye out for any indications of elevated blood pressure. I made a note of my client's address and my precise return time. "Give me a call right away if anything changes." "I mean, anything," I said. "Dean, go." As she settled onto the chair next to Lucas's bed, Mom remarked, "It's critical for your future. If something changes, we'll give you a call." I thanked my parents once more, gave Lucas a forehead kiss, and departed for the meeting. Leaving him made me feel like trash. However, I had faith that my parents would remain with him, in spite of everything. I thought that in a real emergency, they act appropriately. An elegant downtown hotel served as the venue for the meeting with the Singaporean investors. When I got to the meeting room, Mr. Liang and his group were already waiting. I was still dressed in the same outfit from that morning while everyone else was dressed in immaculate suits. "Except for the bloodied clothing I had to change out of when I was in the hospital, Mr. Wilson." Mr. Leon shook my hand firmly in greeting. "We can't wait to complete our collaboration." I expressed regret for how I looked and gave a quick explanation that I was totally focused on our discussion, despite a family situation. After receiving a polite nod from Mr. Liang, we started working. Surprisingly, the discussions went smoothly. We worked out the final financial figures, spoke about schedules, and looked over architectural blueprints by 8:30 p.m. They were prepared to sign the contracts as they were happy with everything. I checked my phone out of habit and saw that I had set it to quiet for the meeting. I saw the fact that there were no missed calls or messages as encouraging. "Lucas needs to be steady." I looked at Mr. Liang. "You appear worried, Mr. Wilson. Is everything okay?" I was hesitant since I didn't want to ruin the meeting just before it was over. "ICU cares for my son." He held out his hand. "But my folks are with him. Say nothing more. Family comes first. If necessary, we can complete this tomorrow." I was surprised that he understood. I guess we're about done here, but thank you. After we complete the papers, I will be able to respond to him. In the following half hour, we signed the contracts. Mr. Liang kept his hand on mine for a second longer than was required, as we shook hands to seal the agreement. When he was young, my oldest grandson, Mr. Wilson, developed a serious illness. To spend time with him, I skipped a crucial meeting. My grandson made a full recovery, but that corporation went with another partner. Never once have I second-guessed my decision. I was very affected by his statements. After giving him my heartfelt gratitude, I picked up my briefcase and headed back to the hospital. Getting there at 9:10 p.m., I knew something wasn't right as soon as I got out of the elevator at the intensive care unit. The area surrounding Lucas's room was bustling with activity. I entered and found Dr. Rivera and a group of nurses encircling his bed. They were adding fresh IVs, changing equipment, and inspecting monitors bags. My parents are nowhere to be seen. When Dr. Rivera glanced up, her expression changed from one of professional concern to one of barely controlled rage. "Where have you been, Mr. Wilson?" "For the past 3 hours, we have been attempting to contact someone. About 2 hours ago, your son's intracranial pressure rapidly increased. To relieve the pressure on his brain, we had to do an emergency ventricular ostomy." Finally, what I rushed to catch up in my thoughts, she explained that in order to install a drain and lower the pressure, we had to cut a little hole in his skull. Recognizing my perplexity, nobody present to give their consent. We had to follow emergency procedures. He might have had irreversible brain damage or worse if we had waited any longer. As I tried to take in what she was saying, I stood motionless. My parents were meant to be present. At 5:30, I dropped them off here with him. The charge nurse, Nick, came forward. There was a mixture of frustration and pity on his face. Since approximately 6:15 p.m., "Sir, no one has been present with your son. We repeatedly dialed the numbers in his file when we were unable to contact anyone. In order to continue with the required treatment, we put emergency procedures into place." I looked at my phone. In my haste to get to the meeting on time, I missed 17 hospital calls. During the negotiations, I had forgotten to check it after silencing it. I immediately called my mother. "No response. Dad," I tried. The same outcome. I repeatedly phoned and left more frantic voicemails. "You're where you left Lucas, but why? Give me a call back ASAP." Lucas and I were sitting there while the ventilator pumped air into his small body and the new bandage was inserted into his head to release pressure. Dr. Rivera reassured me that without the emergency operation, they had just about caught the rise in time. He may have passed away or had irreversible brain injury about midnight. My parents have not contacted me yet to share an update with friends who might be interested in Lucas. I opened Facebook. I was really taken aback by the first post on my feed. A 33 balloon floats behind my brother Pete as he is surrounded by pals at Morton's Steakhouse downtown. Caption, "The best supper ever on a birthday. Thank you for the surprise celebration, Mom and Dad." At 7:30 p.m., the picture was uploaded included in it. While my kid was struggling for his life with a drain in his skull to protect his brain from swelling, my parents were both grinning and lifting glasses in a toast. They were off to give Pete a surprise birthday supper. Something inside of me broke and then solidified as I gazed at their happy expressions in the picture. I spent a lot of time looking at the image. Everything is coming together. They hadn't even bothered to check on Lucas by calling the hospital. They were singing happy birthday and ordered appetizers. When he could have passed away, Rose's rage inside of me was icy and illuminating. I noted the timestamps on the screenshots I took of the Facebook post. After that, I shut down the app and gave my son my whole attention. Lucas didn't wake up during the night. Every hour, the nurses checked his vitals and the ventricular ostomy drainage. Each time, they reassured me that his intracranial pressure was dropping and that he was stable. The antibiotics were starting to take effect. I didn't get any sleep. I held his hand while I sat in the chair next to his bed. My parents eventually entered the intensive care unit at 6 a.m. as if nothing had occurred. They had left me seated in the same spot the previous evening, except right now Lucas had a drain emerging from his skull and a bandage wrapped over his head. Dad was the first to speak. His voice was informal. How is he doing? All we did was go grab breakfast. Even I was startled at how icy my chuckle was. 12 hours of breakfast. Mom's expression tensed. What is the intended meaning of that? I swiveled the screen of my phone in their direction. Pete's post on Facebook remains active. It signifies this. Both of them froze. Dad was the first to recover. His look settled into the contemptuous one I was so familiar with. It was only for a few of hours. For months, Pete had been organizing this. Last night, they made a hole in my son's skull. My voice was little more than a whisper when I spoke. He could have perished. I trusted you, therefore. I wasn't here to give my consent. Mom stood up. You're going overboard. Dean, this is a hospital. He was all okay. Doctors were everywhere for the 33rd birthday of Pete. It only occurs once. The words struck me like a punch to the body. I could clearly see where Lucas and I were standing next to them at that precise time. My son's life would never be as significant as Pete's birthday supper. Get out, I replied. You're being overly dramatic now. Mom lost her temper. We assisted you, and you behave like this. You've never shown gratitude. Pete, at least, is grateful for everything we do for him. Get out, I yelled. This time I repeated more loudly. Our increased cries startled a security guard who materialized in the doorway. Is anything wrong here? Dad touched his mother's shoulder. Come on, he's always been like this, exaggerating little issues. Mom glanced back as they left. Never again call us for assistance. Never, I replied. Don't worry, I will not repeat that error. I took a seat next to Lucas again when they had gone. A peculiar serenity descended upon me. Something had changed irrevocably. Surprisingly, it felt like independence when the final thread that bound me to my parents broke. Later that morning, Dr. Rivera stopped by to see how Lucas was doing. She changed his medicines, checked the ventricular ostomy site, and went over his most recent lab findings. She claimed he's stabilizing. The most recent cultures demonstrate that the antibiotics are effective and the operation proceeded smoothly. We're still in the woods, though. For at least another 48 hours, we must keep a tight eye on him, too worn out and emotionally spent to talk. I just nodded. With her clipboard in her lap, she took a seat on the chair beside me. As Lucas's physician, Mr. Wilson, I must share something with you in anticipation of more terrible news. I looked up. She stated in a quiet but forceful voice that what transpired last night was a significant example of medical negligence. Without telling the medical staff, your parents left a critically ill child in the intensive care unit. She would have left the sentence hanging if we hadn't noticed the pressure rise at that precise moment. Everything is recorded in Lucas's chart, she added. The time they departed, the emergency procedure we had to follow, and our attempts to get in touch with you during that time. You have grounds if you wish to pursue this legally. Startled, I gazed at her. Do you believe that I ought to sue my own parents? She slowly looked into my eyes. Your son may have died as a result of what they did, in my opinion. In my 20 years as a doctor, I have witnessed far too many children suffer because adults failed to take their responsibilities seriously. I'm just stating that I gave Lauren's mother, Beth, a call after she left. On the first ring, she responded. How is my boy doing? She inquired right away. To see how Lucas was doing, she called daily. I told her everything. The surgery, the meningitis. He was left behind by my parents for Pete's birthday supper. Without hesitation, she responded, I'm on the next flight. Until I arrive, don't leave his side. The next call came from Carl, my business partner. Prior to the meeting with the Singaporeans, I contacted him about the emergency. I assured him that the transaction was signed. Lucas, however, is in worse shape than we initially believed. The Singaporeans fully comprehend, he stated. This morning, I received a call from Mr. Liang. He says great things about you, claimed that your handling of the matter demonstrated extraordinary character. They are totally dedicated to collaborating with us. Don't worry about anything but your son, he said after pausing. For a time, the company can function without you. We have decent folks. A nurse arrived with some paperwork that afternoon. "Are you Dean Wilson?" She gave me a business card after I nodded. "Jason Mercer is this person. He is the hospital's lawyer. When you have a minute, he would want to talk to you." Jason was a sharp-looking, no-nonsense man in his 40s. He clarified that the hospital was required by law to notify the appropriate authorities of any child endangerment incidents. "Your son's experience fits that description. The hospital will file a report," he added, "but you also have other choices." He described the format of a civil litigation, the basis for mental anguish, child endangerment, and carelessness, the procedure and time frame for the possible damages I might pursue. He suggested that before making any judgments, consult your own lawyer. Don't wait too long, though. These issues are subject to statutes of limitations. I had decided by the time Beth came over that night, my parents had made it clear to me who they were and where Lucas and I were in their hierarchy of importance. I would now demonstrate to them that their decision had repercussions. Lucas was hospitalized for 2 weeks. His recuperation would be lengthy, but the meningitis had been detected in time to avoid irreversible harm. He had headaches, exhaustion, and light and sound sensitivity. Beth slept on the chair and never left our side by his bed, arranging for friends to provide meals. Despite having arthritis, which made every movement agonizing, she was 65 years old and never complained. I had developed a method with my business. Every morning, Beth would remain with Lucas for 2 hours while I spent the rest of the day at the hospital. My project manager took charge of managing client meetings and job locations. Not a single contract was lost. During the second week, I was taken aback when Mr. Liang, the Singaporean investor, showed up at the hospital one morning. He insisted on moving our planning meetings to after Lucas was released from the hospital and brought a hand-carved wooden robot for Lucas. Simply, he responded, "Business can wait. I've been in your shoes. My daughter had leukemia 20 years ago because I refused to leave her side. I nearly lost a big contract. That business is currently my largest client." He gave me his card with his number on it. "When you're ready, give me a call. The offer will remain in effect." We had a new routine once Lucas was eventually released from the hospital. Beth took up residence in my guest room until Lucas is able to stand again. Kevin and Marcus. 2 of my workers began coming in on the weekends to assist with house maintenance and yard chores. While I caught up on work, I had been ignoring Kevin sitting with Lucas and teaching him card tricks and stories. When Lucas was stronger, Marcus brought his children over to play with him, providing him some typical childhood time. I met with Anthony Reeves, a lawyer who specializes in medical malpractice and personal damage litigation. 3 months after Lucas returned home, I provided all the paperwork, including screenshots of Pete's Facebook post, Lucas's medical records, incident reports from the hospital, and my phone logs with the hospital's missed calls. Anthony went over everything in detail. "This is a compelling argument," he stated. "I want to be clear, though. Family lawsuits are often messy. It quickly becomes personal. I said that the day they abandoned my son, they ceased to be my family. Nevertheless, you must be ready. They'll probably accuse you of leaving your son behind to attend a business meeting. They will attempt to downplay the events. They'll infuse it with feeling. The next week, we filed the complaint mental discomfort, child endangerment, and negligence. We requested compensation for Lucas's trauma, continuing care, and medical expenses. They were really taken aback by the initial court petition. Dad called furious over treachery in the family, and how Pete always made me envious. Are you suing us? Your own parents? Give me an example of something you have done for me in the past 10 years. I'll wait, I said. All I needed was the stillness on the other end of the telephone. Mom attempted a new strategy, crying as she described how this would ruin the family and hurt your father. When that didn't work, she threatened to tell everyone how unappreciative you are as a son. I didn't bother to mention that I was prepared to pay that amount. I just hung up after saying, "See you in court." The case continued for more than a year. An expensive lawyer that my parents hired attempted to portray me as a careless father who left my child behind for a business meeting. However, Dr. Rivera's evidence regarding the emergency operation and my parents' abduction was indisputable, and the hospital records were damning. The ICU receptionist, nurses, and witnesses all recorded their early departure. Even the restaurant waiter who recalled them showing up for Pete's celebration and remarking on the adorable balloon arrangement they had brought. The last nail was Pete's Facebook post, which included his own deposition and the date and pictures. In it, he acknowledged that he knew my parents had left Lucas in the hospital so he could attend his surprise party. Instead, did you think about inviting them to stay with your nephew? During the deposition, Anthony questioned him. Pete gave a shrug. My birthday was that day. I could tell everything I needed to know from the judge's face during the testimony. Lucas's recovery progressed during the procedure. Slowly, the headaches stopped. He was full of enthusiasm again. He returned to school, joined his soccer team, and began learning karate. He never inquired about my parents, though. The judge's decision was unambiguous, and we prevailed. The defendant's acts, according to the court, demonstrated a careless disregard for the welfare of a kid with a serious ailment. This is a severe example of negligence that may have led to catastrophe, not just a family argument. $750,000 was awarded for Lucas's continued care, medical expenses, and psychological harm. In addition, the judge mandated that my parents cover all court expenses. Despite their lack of cash, my parents had a respectable retirement account and equity in their home. They would have to liquidate the majority of their money and sell their house as a result of the decision. Dad came over to me looking pale as we were leaving the courthouse. "We've been wrecked by you." Flatly, he said. "I'm hoping you're happy." I stared at him emotionless. "No, Father. The instant you left Lucas, you destroyed yourselves. This is only the bill?" The lawsuit's proceeds were placed in a trust for Lucas's future needs and education, with some money reserved for any further medical care he might need. Their money wasn't something I needed or wanted. I wanted to be held accountable for previous years. Lucas, who is now 11 years old, recovered completely from the meningitis and had no lingering symptoms following the lawsuit. He played competitive soccer, excelled academically, and had taken an interest in computer programming. Beth had purchased a modest home 10 minutes away from ours and had relocated permanently to Indianapolis. She had grown into the grandma Lucas deserved and joined him for supper 3 times a week. Marcus and Kevin were still good buddies. Holidays spent with our family. They would teach Lucas how to fish and become his honorary uncles, building a treehouse with him, attending his school plays and soccer matches. The agreement with the Singaporeans has grown to a yearly commercial partnership worth $5 million. I became acquaintances with Mr. Lee Young and his business, opening doors. I never imagined that was feasible. My company had grown into 3 states and now employed 45 individuals. Mutual acquaintances informed me that my parents had been compelled to sell their home and relocate to a modest apartment on the other side of town. Pete had moved in with them after all of his business endeavors failed. The court ruling had taken a toll on them, who were still making do with what little they had left. They had lost their attractiveness. They had little money saved for retirement after paying the settlement's legal costs. Dad had returned to work as a consultant, but there weren't many prospects at 70. Then one night, a number I didn't recognize called on my phone. "Wilson, Mr. Mercy, hospital is this. Due to a major cardiac episode, your mother was hospitalized. She's requesting you?" I sat there absorbing the words. "Thank you for informing me. I understand I took my time getting to the hospital. Rather, I helped Lucas with his schoolwork, wrapped up our supper, and put him to bed. After that, I parked in the same hospital garage where I had frantically hurried with Lucas years prior after driving slowly across town. Mom appeared frail and little as I entered her room. She was connected to machinery by cables and tubes. Dad looked every inch of his 70 years as he sat slouched in a chair next to her. When he noticed me, his head jerked up. "Dean, I'm grateful. We need your assistance." I remained silent. "Just had a look at 2 of them." Dad went on. "Your mom needs bypass surgery. Not all of it will be covered by our insurance. We had used up all of our savings." "Pete, A. He walked away. "Pete is unable to assist us." Mom extended a pallid hand. Although I am your mother, Dean, I am aware that we have had disagreements. Please assist us. There is nowhere else for us to go." I remembered Lucas's little bandaged fingers and the ventilator breathing for him while they ate birthday cake across town, as I gazed at her outstretched hand. The operation. Dad pushed. The amount is $120,000, not protected by insurance. After your mother heals, we may gradually reimburse you, just like you did with the judgment. Quietly, I asked. Dad became red. That was not the same. You were being vengeful there. Please, Dean, Mom muttered. I took a step toward the bed and gazed down at her. Remember how Lucas's brain swelled and doctors had to drill into his skull while he was resting in the intensive care unit. He had no one to grasp his hand. His loved ones were not present to speak for him because you prioritized Pete's birthday celebration over the life of your grandchild. Her eyes welled with tears. I apologize. Dean, I was mistaken. We were mistaken. Don't penalize me for a single error. Please. I leaned closer. There was more than one error. I was shown exactly where I stood for the rest of my life. You are now aware of your position with me. I stood up straight. You'll be all right, Lucas. However, it was his birthday. Once a year, that is. Her expression of disbelief was priceless. After all this time, she was thrown back at her own words. Dad leaped to his feet. You're a cruel jerk. I turned to him calmly. After everything we had done for you. Dad, name one thing. I have yet to receive a response. He became deflated. I moved to the door, sat down again, and stopped. Tomorrow, my assistant will deliver a $10,000 check, enough to see a heart expert who can assist you in setting up a payment schedule. Is that all? Dad inquired astonishedly. Your mom could pass away. I turned to face them both. It's a hospital. She will be all right. I went on to say that the $10,000 was a present from Lucas. He told me to assist grandmother a little bit because we're different from them. Not because she deserves it. When I asked him what I should do, I had my lawyer deliver the check and the necessary documents the next day, absolving them of any further requests for financial assistance from me. I had written at the bottom, our connection is over now. Our account has been permanently closed. I watched Lucas play soccer with Marcus's children in the backyard that evening, as Beth, Kevin, and Marcus sat on the deck. Are you all right? Beth squeezed my hand and asked. As I watched my son's face light up after he scored a goal, I nodded. Yes, everything will work out perfectly. I believed for years that family was about responsibilities and genetic ties. I've discovered that family is the one who is there throughout both the good times and the bad. Kevin, Beth, and Marcus Liang. These individuals who owed us nothing biologically showed up when it counted. I remember that time in the hospital. On occasion, the doctor informed me that they had no choice but to drill into my son's skull without getting permission from his parents. How my parents' actions may have cost Lucas his life or his future, and how I almost lost all that was important. Mom made it through her operation. A cardiologist who used to be one of my clients volunteered to do the treatment at a discounted charge following my $10,000 donation. Not because they contacted me to express gratitude, but because he called to inform me that everything went smoothly. I am aware of this. A few months later, Pete attempted to contact and request money. His number was blocked by me. He once visited my office and discussed a surefire investment opportunity. Before he could continue proposing his next sure thing, security led him out. Recently, Lucas asked me if you had grandparents other than Beth. For school, he was working on a family tree project. I was honest with him, telling him that although my parents were still living, they were no longer involved in our lives because they had made decisions that made it clear they couldn't be trusted with his welfare. Did they treat you cruelly as a child? He inquired. I assured him it wasn't exactly mean, just absent in the ways that were important. He gave a nod. With that insight, children can occasionally expose your shortcomings. For example, Grandma Beth's legs hurt and Kevin still finds time to teach me things, despite losing his kid. She still attends all of my games, though. That's exactly what I stated. My father sent me a letter last week. Mom didn't make it because she had another heart attack. Their church was the location of the funeral. Lucas and I were welcome to come, he said. I didn't go. I sent a card that read along with flowers. Despite everything I did, call her mother once, therefore I'm sad for your loss. The point is, I don't regret going away. I don't regret the lawsuit. Furthermore, I have no regrets about choosing to have a family rather than being forced to. Family actions don't happen because of blood. What I did was right for us, but I'm not saying it was right for everyone. Knowing when to leave is sometimes the most crucial lesson for a family.